Hello everybody, once again it is Lehman Crafton, aka Zorvalachan, Less Than Guru, and I am back to talk about Orrorsh, the cosm of fear, the reality of fear. This video will be just a little bit different. I'll still go through the same process that I've been going with all the different realities, with the axioms, world laws, my thoughts and things, but towards the end I might go off on what might be considered a rant. So if you don't want to hear that, I'll say something like the rant's going to start, so you can turn it off or go somewhere else, or if you want to listen to it, you can. That little shake was Mars jumping up on the table where I have my camera. He is always wanting attention when I do these. So there he is. He popped up on the edge of my knee. So I guess without any further ado, I will introduce the reality of Orrorsh. So Orrorsh is a reality of fear and horror, and it's Gothic in nature. So it's not sci-fi horror, it's not even fantasy horror, it is the Gothic type horror. There is some little bit of maybe Call of Cthulhu type thing, but that's more of the investigation and research aspect of the cosm, not necessarily that there's greater elder beings out there that our minds cannot comprehend. It's more of this guy here, the Gaunt Man, is impossible to comprehend. He is the High Lord of Orrorsh, and he is the most ancient known High Lord, and his darkness device, Hecaton, is one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful darkness device. At least that's what they say. But it is without a doubt that the Gaunt Man is extremely ancient, is extremely powerful, and he is one that he has long-term goals and long-term plans, and he is able to play a long game. He can wait. He waited 2 millennia to attack, to invade core Earth. And basically the setting wise in original Torg is 2,000 years ago. He stumbled across core Earth and saw the vast amount of possibility energy, and he realized that this possibility energy was enough to make him Torg, which is like a supreme, even above gods type being that would rival, say, the Nameless One. So he realized also that the sheer amount of possibility energy, which is kind of like a fuel, if he invaded the pushback of the just tremendous amounts of energy, would be able to rip up or destroy his bounded triangle steles that he would have put on core Earth, which are used as kind of like a buffer, that it would be able to destroy those, and the energy would go back to his cosm and possibly destroy his cosm. So he thought, what can I do? And he spent the next 2 millennia figuring out that he needed to invade Earth with other High Lords. And he's the one that kind of went out and found other High Lords and determined who would be the one to, or who would be the ones that he wanted with him. And he didn't always choose the biggest and baddest High Lords. He chose the ones that he felt would serve his purpose, because if he would find a High Lord that was close to him in power, then there would be a chance that maybe he wouldn't come out on top, and he wants to become Torg. He doesn't want any of the other High Lords to become Torg. It's kind of like a person putting together a team, and then he knows that at some point, once the objectives met, he's going to kill all the team members so that he could be a deity. So he picked people that he knew might be really good at what they do, but they had flaws and things like that. So the Gaunt Man then gets with these other High Lords, and he figures out that there is a certain amount, that's a minimum amount needed, but he adds a few more, because he realizes that if he only, say, needs 5 total High Lords, including himself, if one of those other 4s doesn't invade Earth, then that blowback could hit and really hurt or destroy other cosms of the ones who actually came in. So he added a few to make it even more safe, like failsafe, which was good because one of the realities known as Tharcold was beat back. It wasn't that they didn't show up, they showed up, but then they were beat back. And when I do my Tharcold reality video, I'll explain that, but we're dealing with a Orrorsh video. So the Gaunt Man, throughout all of his time, and all the High Lords are evil, all the High Lords are bad, they have darkness devices, which are kind of like children or creations of the Nameless One, which is the all-destructive, destroy everything type greater being or power. And he is kind of like one that Zovas has been evil, and if you read the novel Interview with Evil, it goes back. He destroyed basically his sacrificed his whole home planet to get power for himself. So he has no qualms about destroying whoever, whatever, no emotional ties. He is pure evil, and he has figured out how to use fear and horror to enrich himself with possibility energy. And if you go back to my earlier video about the setting, and I explained that storytelling is very big, and using a glory, which is a card, but you do that when you do a glorious act, you can then, as a Storm Knight, you can use storytelling to plant a story seed, get that story to spread to others, and that fills them up with hope, and it generates possibility energy and allows them to survive another transformation, so then you can rip up Stele and they won't become what ifs. The Gaunt Man is realized, and this isn't stated, so you could say that this is my opinion or conjecture, but he has a thing that he uses as fear, and it's known that he is able to extract more possibility energy. So my theory, and the way I like to present it, because to me it matches, that's what the Storm Knights do on the one hand is kind of the good storytelling, and what the Gaunt Man does through fear is bad storytelling or evil storytelling. He doesn't want to just kill everybody, because then whatever possibility energy he's taken is taken, and then there's no more. So he wants to make sure that he gets every last drop of possibility energy. So what he does is he will have horrors and horrific things happen and kill people, but he does it strategically. He does it where he has that survivor that is able to then go to a big populated city or area and spread that story of fear. So instead of hope that fills people up with possibility energy to withstand another transformation so that they don't become what ifs, the Gaunt Man uses fear to fill the people up with maybe just a little less possibility energy, because he doesn't want them to be able to transform back. He wants to keep them in his reality, but he wants to extract even more possibility energy. So it's my theory that the fear has not an exact equal, but it has a somewhat equivalent effect with that type of storytelling. So you get those people fear, you get them really anxious, and it's the opposite of the storytelling, but it still kind of does the same thing. It allows him to extract every last drop of that possibility energy. And once he's gotten pretty much everything, and so many people have died that the fear no longer has a good return, on the investment, you could say, if you remember my last video on Nippon Tech using corporate terms. But basically, you kill, you keep people fear, you build up a little possibility, you create a little possibility energy with them, you extract that, and there is a point where the fear both becomes so numbing that if you're always exposed, you don't get that rush, you don't get that anxiety, you kind of accept your fate. You no longer create that possibility energy, and you have less people because you have been killing things in horrific ways to spread that fear, and it gets to where the current population, it's not worth it to him to just add a little bit. You know, it's like each time, like he started off, the planet had, or the cosm had this much possibilities, and then it goes down and he fills up a little bit more, and then he takes, and then he fills up a little bit more, and then he takes, and then he but it never gets back to that fullness of the cosm of possibilities. So there's a point where then he just sucks everything dry, leaves it a rune ash of no life cosm, and he goes on to the next cosm. Or he'll right when it's at the very end of it, he'll go to the next cosm, and that gives him a way there. He can use the populace of that dying cosm to spread the fear. They come across and they talk about all the horrors that they've seen, and just like I said, the cyber papacy, when they were the false papacy, were trying to get people to understand their reality of let's destroy all technology because technology is bad, etc. The Gaunt Man sends people to explain all the horrors that they're going to come up with, to get people accepting that when it does come. So that is kind of the ecology of fear, I guess you could say, on how the Gaunt Man thinks and how he works. And he spent all of his time perfecting exactly where he wants his axioms, what he wants his world laws, and things like that. So let's go into axioms. So the social axiom is 20, which is the same as the Nile Empire. The culture of the cosm he's coming from, which is known as Gaia, which is another cosm out there that is Earth-like. Which whenever I say Earth-like, I mean the continent shapes are pretty similar to Earth. They might not be exactly the same. Even Magna Rarita, which is a flat Earth, still has the continents kind of on it. Just look up flat earthers on YouTube and you'll see. But it's that type of world. And Terra is similar to Earth, so Gaia is similar to Earth in the late 1800s, so the late 19th century, and maybe even the early 20th century up, and in my opinion it would go up to a little before World War I without airplanes and tanks and stuff like that. And really, if there's any type of gasoline type cars, they're like super primitive, but you get things like rifles that shoot from cartridges and not muzzle loading and things like that. So so we'll go on to tech is 19. So the social is the same as the Nile Empire, and one under both Terra and Core Earth. The tech is 19, so it's a couple of points under Core, or a few points under Core Earth. And I'm going to sneeze. Oh, excuse me. So the tech is at 19, so it's above Isle, that 15, but it's lower than Nile Empire, 20s, 1920s, 30s, pre-World War. Pre-World War II. So then you have Spirit, which is a 17, which is pretty high, and 17, there's quite a few cosms with that 17, or realities. As we talked about, there's Nile Empire with 17, there is the land below is 17, then there's another reality out there we'll get to later, it's 17. So Orrorsh is 17. It's one higher than Isle, which is 16. So it is a pretty spiritual. Priests can call down miracles and pray to their deities and have actual things happen. But the main religion that came from Gaia is known as, and I pronounce it Sekelem. I have heard people say Sekelem, using the same an S and C both having a sound. Seems kind of strange when I read it. So I always pronounced it Sekelem. And it is a Protestant-ish type religion. So not a Catholic Christian or Orthodox Christian. It's a Protestant type Christianity variant that's been manipulated by the Gaunt Man. He has taken away a lot of the forgiveness and the turn the other cheek and love thy neighbor as thyself type messages from the New Testament, and it focuses on the fire, the brimstone, the wrath of God, the plagues. If you do something against, God, bad things will happen to you. Miracles that they have are things like turning people and creatures into pillars of salt, like Lot's wife, and things like that. So they're the militant type Protestant-ish religion. And then magic is 15. So magic is, I believe, out of everything, it's the second highest realm. Isle being an 18 being the highest. So the 15 means that people don't have innate magic, and the Gaunt Man has shifted it sort of into a cult type thing. In original Torg, there are what would be considered spell casters, but they usually have things that are gruesome. So you might have a divinity spell where you can see in the distance and you have to use an actual eyeball, so a component might be gruesome, or the effect might be gruesome. So instead of casting a fireball to burn somebody, you boil their blood. You actually, get inside of them and boil their blood and do damage that way. So there's a more gruesome type effect, and that all kind of plays into the even the good guys do things that make others afraid, like or have fear, not just being afraid, but actually having terror in them. Even with the miracles of turning someone into salt can seem much more horrific. I mean, the end result's the same if you call down a big bolt of lightning to crash into somebody, but that's kind of like understandable. A big, bolt comes down, but if you turn somebody and they're physically, becoming a pillar of salt, that's like changing who they are, not just causing an effect to happen to them, but changing who they are. And to me, that's where a lot of the fear can come from. So those are the axioms. Then we have the world laws. There's the law of corruption, which is different than the law of darkness, which has corruption in Isle, but it is similar in the more corrupt things you do, and you get corruption points and things like that. And instead of giving you bonuses to having a skill, you do get that becoming ugly and messed up by the more corrupt you are, but you kind of have an illusion that's put around you so people can't see that you're corrupt. There is a skill, kind of a mystical skill called True Sight, that allows people to see through that. And that's one thing that Storm Knights can have, or if there's no Storm Knights from Orrorsh, you can get a connection, maybe card, that you find somebody that has this and is able to see corrupt people. But you have this corruption, and once corruption becomes so, gets to a certain point, that character no longer is a Storm Knight, no longer a PC. They become a Game Master NPC, basically. They become a villain. The world, the reality can corrupt heroes, corrupt everyday ordinary people as well, and turn them into agents of evil. So that's the law of corruption. Then there's the law of perseverance, which is kind of interesting. And hold on one moment. Sorry about that. I felt the sneeze come on, and I didn't want to sneeze again on camera. So that's what that was. Oh, but we were talking about a law of perseverance. The law of perseverance is interesting because it's all based off of the big bad end guy. So whatever the big bad end guy is in Orrorsh has a fear rating, and it can be as low as like a half. And when the party faces any type of monster or horror or even a gruesome scene, one of the players makes kind of a group roll against perseverance. And normally at the beginning, when you just start an adventure and you haven't even figured out what the big bad end guy might be, you're probably gonna fail. And when you fail, you take that fear rating and you times it by the amount of Storm Knights in the group, and that gives you a fear points, which as a game master, then you can use them to buy bad things happening to the players that usually last a scene. And one of them that costs 2 points is called Marked for Death, which means you mark a player for death, or character for death, not the player, hopefully. You mark a Storm Knight for death, and for the rest of the scene, they can't use possibilities to soak damage, which is one of the two big things that you use possibilities for. So your Storm Knights need to then be careful, because if they get into fights, their normal Storm Knight thing of being able to find another reality and choose that version of themselves that didn't take damage is nullified. But there's other effects that the game master can give people, but sometimes you have monsters that are so big, and I would play Halloween games where I'd have people from various parties come together. So like my two groups that usually have, say, 7 to 8 people, they would come together, and then they would bring a few friends that had never played, but I'd have a big Orrorsh game. So I could grab, like, 20 to 25 people easily, and then even that half fear rating monster could generate 10 points for me to dole out. So I would feel like Oprah, which is like, you're marked for death, and you're marked for death, and you're marked for death, and you get a marked for death, and you get a marked for death type thing. And a lot of people use that and thought that Orrorsh was very, very harsh. Okay, but let's put that to the side now. So perseverance. So when you then, as a group, start investigating and finding out things about the big bad end guy, you start getting bonuses. And if you get through those scenes, it's kind of like your mind adjusts to that horror that you saw that gave you all that bad stuff, the fear points that the game master dished out effects to. Then you start getting bonuses added to that roll, or not the roll, the total, but you understand, you get bonuses to that check. So at some point, hopefully, before you fight the big bad end guy, you have made that perseverance check, and then you can fight them without having those fear effects. So that's basically how the law of perseverance worked. And so those are kind of the world laws, the main world laws and axioms. So one of the things also that was good with Orrorsh, and again with the background acting weird when I hold up books, this book was The Creatures of Orrorsh. So kind of can see that, and it kind of went the same way as when I explained the Isle, that you have a black and white picture of the threat, and then a description of it and how it acted, and then its stats, and two pages per threat, and then you had a map of showing where it showed up in the cosm, where it showed up in the realm, and then a size comparison to a human. In this book, they used a Victorian soldier instead of the elven dragon rider. So you had that. You could use Pixod's Practical Grimoire for spells. I always made my Orrorsh characters who wanted to go into spell, add something gruesome to it. So I would say, okay, you can pick this, magic missile type thing where you throw some darts and they kind of act like D&D magic missiles, but it needs to have some gruesome effect, or maybe you're throwing fingers instead of darts, you know, or magic missile, and they just get really sharp and they have a claw at the end, you know, and something like that. So it was always, you know, getting the players involved in the setting, in the reality. So I've talked about Gaia, I've talked about the Gaunt Man, I've talked about the axioms and world laws. This game, this setting did allow people to try or to play werewolves, and what I will purposely mispronounce as vampires, because they spelt it P-Y-R-E instead of I-R-E. So just to make that difference, because in Orrorsh they gave the game master the rules to be able to kind of bend what threats could do. So not every vampire or vampire was the same, not every werewolf was the same, so the party couldn't just fight one and then use all of that knowledge for the next thing. So if you had two big bad end guys that were both vampires, even though they had collected all that information and investigation for the first one, none of that had any effect for the second one, because it could be a completely different type of horror, of nightmare, big bad end guy, which I always thought was pretty cool. You do that fear. So now I'm going to actually talk about fear in horror, because fear in horror is sometimes really hard for people to get, and I've not always succeeded, but I have a few tips and tools, just because horror has never affected me when I've played fantasy or read fantasy. I could read a Stephen King novel and get immersed in the horror, and, you know, get those like cold chills of, you know, just that's a scary type of situation, even though I know it's fiction. You know, it's not like I'm sleeping with lights on or anything, but I can get that feeling of fear, you know, that makes horror stories really awesome. But when I've read something like was it The Eye of the Dragon that he wrote, that was kind of in a more medieval fantasy type realm, because it had a wizard in it, I was not afraid at all. To me, it was just a fantasy story that had bad things happen to people. Or even as far as going into like D&D Ravenloft, because you have wizards, and even though when it came out in 2nd edition, it cut a lot of what wizards could and could not do, and the same thing with clerics, it was still fantasy. So that always made it hard for me to get any amount of fear. Feel it when I was either playing, and it was hard to convey as a game master, because we're playing a fantasy game and we're trying to put horror into it. Playing something completely horror like Call of Cthulhu, then I can kind of get a little afraid of type thing, or but it's kind of a mix mash, to not go directly with Orrorsh, but the fear motif. I've played a game which of Mutants and Masterminds, 2nd edition, and the game master was really awesome, and we had, you know, superhero type characters, but he had a kind of Call of Cthulhu-ish spin on one of the big long adventure arcs that we had, and it was fun, but I never really got that experience of dread. I never felt that, because we were playing superheroes. And the same thing is happening currently. I'm in a Pathfinder game where it's a Strange Aeons, and it's kind of Call of Cthulhu-ish inspired, and there's a lot of dark things in it, but it's fantasy, so it's really hard when you have that fantasy or superhero background. So now I'm going to kind of go off into my rant. So if you don't want to hear me rant, you can pause. This is at the 30-minute mark, which is pretty close to what all my previous ones, except for the first couple, because I was kind of explaining a little concepts that now I don't have to explain. So go ahead and stop that here if you don't want to hear me go off on a rant. But if you want to hear my opinion about Orrorsh specifically and Torg specifically, then please stay with me and we'll have a discussion, or at least you'll hear me rant a little. So, in the main setting, or the overall setting video, I talked about my view of Torg being cinematic and not heroic. And that goes against a lot of people's idea. They like to see Torg as a heroic game. And then, when they get to this realm of Orrorsh, it blows their mind that Storm Knights go there to die. And that's one of the quotes. Orrorsh is where Storm Knights go to die. And I will say that, but I also will say it's not, that does not mean TPK. It does not mean total party kill. It doesn't mean your whole party is going to be wiped. It doesn't even mean that the trope of there being one girl that survives at the end and the monster comes back needs to be done either. What I want to say is that no, Torg is not heroic. It's just there's many realms that help heroic actions, like the Nile Empire, where you can use that extra bit of possibility energy to even, anybody can use it to boost an action, and in Nile Empire you can double boost an action. Or, Isle has light and honor, which can go against the darkness. It can add cool things to your skill. Orrorsh has none of that. The world laws, like perseverance, are set there to hinder the party, to bring that fear aspect to, even if you're like, oh, this is Torg, it's heroic, and I don't personally feel that fear. Your character should be feeling fear because the odds are stacked against them. It doesn't mean automatic death. What it does mean is you got to play the reality correctly. When you are a superhero in your superhero realm, you can act super heroic. When you're that superhero and you go into the realm of horror and fear, and then you got to realize, even in Old Torg where you carry your realm too, there's stuff actively going against you in this realm that is going to mess you up unless you abide by its reality. And the Storm Knights have perseverance. They can do that investigation. They don't have to just jump in and go fisticuffs for the first vampire that they see, or vampire that they see, because they don't know what that vampire's abilities are. They shouldn't be sure that's sunlight hurts it, that garlic gives them a bad reaction, that they need to be invited to come into your home, because each vampire can be completely different. Same thing with werewolves or any of the horror tropes. And there's some horrors that are just completely out of normal, Gothic horror. It is Bram Stoker's Dracula, where you might have somebody like Van Helsing who knows about this stuff, but he's kind of has to train the other people into it so that they're able to, at the end, kill Dracula. It's not like the movie Van Helsing, where it's action and, super heroic and jumping on top of monsters and shooting from a mile away with a crossbow and things like that, or Solomon Kane. That would be more of like a Orrorsh Nile mix zone maybe. But if you're dealing with Orrorsh Dominant or Pure, you're getting horror, you're getting fear. And if you and your party is able to accept that and go along with the investigations and do that and boost up your perseverance bonuses, then you'll beat the perseverance difficulty and be able to then go up against the big bad end guy. Out of all my years of game mastering Torg and Torg Eternity, which doesn't mean that the whole thing was over the whole 30 years, about 25 with the original Torg, what would it be, 3 to 4 years with Torg Eternity, But during that entire time, it's not like I had adventures, every week in Orrorsh. No. But I've had enough adventures in Orrorsh, and I've had one character death that I can remember, period, in Orrorsh. There might have been others, but if there were, they were by playing the martyr card, which is player agencies. The player themselves determine that their character is going to die. But the only unexpected death was a Nile Empire rocket ranger, so like the Rocketeer with some armor, goes up against the vampire in the first scene, because he's from the Nile Empire and he thinks he can, punch the vampire to death without learning anything at all about the vampire. So there was a big bad end guy that wasn't that vampire. And then, they're failing their perseverance. So, you have this bad effect and this bad effect and this bad effect. And he's like, I'm a hero from the Nile Empire. I'm gonna beat you up. And he died. And to me, that's the type of deaths that happen in Orrorsh. It's because you go in with that, I'm a Rocketeer, I'm a Rocket Ranger, I'm a superhero, Torg is heroic, and you forget that you've gone into the reality of fear. And you get overconfident. And that's basically my rant, is Orrorsh is known to be harsh, to be a Storm Knight killer, but in me, that's the Storm Knights, they're just, the players behind the Storm Knights are not going at it as if they're in a horror realm. They're trying to do the same thing with every other, like they do every other. If you go to my non-Torg videos on old school versus new school, it's the same thing as if you get a person who only understands combat as sport going into something as combat as battle, with that mentality of I can fight and I should be able to get through any encounter. This is not it. Orrorsh is a combat is battle mentality. You stack the deck as much as you can against your opponent, and being a reality of fear and horror, evil, you do research, you do investigation. If you don't have those skills, you use your connection cards to try to get people that do know that, some NPCs that can help you learn that. You go to those libraries and dust off ancient tomes to figure out weaknesses. You do talk to people. You don't hear, oh, there's a ghost in the graveyard, and you go run to the graveyard. You figure out who that ghost is, what their life was, why are they haunting, what things happened to them. You find all of that investigation, and once you are secure in your knowledge, then you go to that ghost in the graveyard. So that is kind of my take on Orrorsh, and why Orrorsh is where Storm Knights go to die. Because, again, the Gaunt Man wants fear. And if he can kill a Storm Knight and let that story spread to the populace of even the heroes die, that benefits here. That generates that fear possibility energy. That doesn't allow for the transformation, but it does allow him to extract a little bit more. Just that taking that very last drop. There might have been a little bit. I don't know if it's generated just a little bit, even less than what normal ords have, or if it just brings out whatever might have still been in them and extracts that. But whatever it is, it's that equivalent but opposite of hope. The hope on the one side, and he's going with fear. Take those tropes, take investigation seriously. Don't go into just fight at the first thing, because in Orrorsh it's not the path of least resistance. You're going to be resisted hard, and you're going to be resisted fast, and you will die. Orrorsh, in the book, they talk about things like secondary characters. Bring in an extra character, or have an extra character ready, or even, oh, if you don't want your character to die, invent a character just for this. I don't think any of that's necessary. I think if the players are smart, if they need to retreat, and I've had groups that the whole party has retreated, so that they were able to then learn and then go back better prepared. If you do things like that, you will survive. The deaths might happen, but they're going to be the same deaths as you might have in Isle or Living Land or even the Nile Empire, which is bad rolls and bad luck, basically. That can happen in any role-playing game at any time. The dice can be against you. The action, you know, a few dice, you know, things in a row happen. When you have some of those fear effects stacked on you and you don't take them into account and you figure I'll just do things like I've always done, then you're playing into this guy's hands. You're doing exactly what he wants you to do. He wants you to think that you can use your Nile Empire superpowers without any problem. And you can still use them. It's just that you're going to get overconfident. And I'll give 2 tips and then I'll wrap this video up, hopefully, unless I think of something differently. But one of the tips I have goes to a Call of Cthulhu game that I played. And I had a asylum guard, and he wasn't a very intelligent character, but he lasted through a whole campaign, and that's because he didn't carry firearms. He carried a billy club, and he would try to, you know, something happened, he would try one bop on the head, you know, with the billy club, and be like, stay down. If the thing did not stay down, you know, if it wasn't obviously human, if it did not stay down, he ran. He understood that there was, he was a big, strong guy. I had, you know, low intelligence, big brute. But if he hit the thing and it didn't stay down, he ran away until they could figure out what was going on. Then you had other characters that had firearms, and this is what I see with Orrorsh also. You get overconfident. You think, oh, I have a gun. I can, you know, the gun does all this damage. I can just sit back and bang, bang, bang. Those characters always died because they overestimated themselves and their ability, and they underestimated the enemy. So you can even go back to Sun Tzu, Art of War. You know, it's better to underestimate yourself and overestimate your enemy. You'll be much more prepared than if you flip the two. The other thing I have is kind of for game masters. Like I said, sometimes it's hard to convey fear, and you can, you know, the book talks about setting up mood by props and lights and candles and all of this stuff, and you can use that. Sometimes it works with groups, other times it doesn't. But one of the things that I have used that's worked successfully, not always, but it has happened, where when I was at Purdue with the fantasy club that I've talked with, and I'm game mastering, and I have a big group of 12 players, and I was trying, and it was a fantasy world, which I told you it's very difficult for me to have any type of feeling of fear or dread in fantasy because it's fantasy. And I was trying to convey a horror of something that would make at least the characters feel fear. And one of the things with horror is don't describe it. Don't describe it. Do not think if I describe something in bloody, specific detail that it is going to scare people. It might gross them out, but here's the problem. There's always a limit of what one person, there's always a limit on how scary they can think, of how horrible things that they can think. Somebody else out there can think even more so, and somebody past them can think even more so, and so on. So I could say the most horrific thing, describe a scene in such minute detail that it is so horrible to me that nothing could ever top it. And there can be people out there who are like, yeah, that's cute, because in their minds they can think of something even worse. So I found, don't specify things. Hint at things. and let your players' imaginations reach their height, which might be less than you, but they could be a lot higher than you, a lot more than you. And use terms that anybody can relate to without specifications. And I'll give a specific example. So I had this creature, and this creature was supposed to exude fear. It was supposed to, and the party, you know, they had to make whatever their check was in fear. And it's been a long time since I played the game system, and I love it to death, but I don't remember what the actual mechanics were for it. But I had people roll versus fear. And this will work in any game, any campaign. And basically, in that group, it was a college group, but there was a lot of people that weren't from college playing there. And I don't remember why this one girl was in a university role-playing group, but she was like 12 or 13. She was probably a daughter of one of the older people there, or sibling or something like that. She was there like every week, playing along with us, you know, adults, 18, 19-year-olds. But she was in the group, and there was a lot of other people in the group. And I was trying and failing at describing this fear type thing. And she asked me, this 12, 13-year-old girl asked me, she's like, I don't quite get it. Could you explain it a little better? And as a game master, I'm like, okay. Remember when you were young and you felt that there was that monster in the closet or down the hall, and you wanted to call out to your mom, and it was extremely hard for you to open your mouth, and even when you did, nothing could come out, and you could just hide under the covers, and like her eyes got really big, and like other people were in it, and I'm not saying I'm a great game master by any means. I consider myself an adequate game master, and it connected with her. She was able, and everybody, including myself, were able to understand that experience, because we've pretty much probably all had it, but differently. What we were thinking was different, and what we're thinking now is different. But I didn't have to describe anything in detail. I let those people do it. And after that adventure, I was kind of a little afraid, like, oh man, did I scare this 13-year-old, bad? Am I going to get in trouble or something? And she came up to me after, and she was like, that was great. That was like one of the best game experiences I've had. And there was a couple of other people who were like, you did that absolutely wonderful. So whether they were, blowing smoke up or something else, but all I know is that's what they told me. And I've used things like that since then. There have been times when I'm like, the head's cut in half, and, skulls are plastered, to each walls and stuff. But somebody can think of something worse than that. And somebody can even think of something worse than what that person thought of. So give that vagueness, hint at it, so they can kind of get a concept in their mind of, yeah, remember when you were in the dark and you were trying to call out to your mom and it wouldn't come out? That's what your character is feeling right now. Then their mind does the work for you. There was a second edition, either first or second edition D&D example, and I don't remember what it was, but one of my good friends kept talking about how this supplement, it was a third-party book, was so completely outrageous, and how it described all the horrors of like hell and demons and devils and something like that, and how it blew his mind, and how it was the most evil book he had ever read. And I read it and was just like, none of that scares me. And again, I know there are people that think about things much less or much more than I do, come up with terrible things. Personally, for the last 4 years, I've worked in a crime laboratory. I see on a daily basis, daily basis, horrible things that humans do to other humans. I understand that, but I know there's people that come out and they can think of crazy stuff and worse things than what I see in real life, which is horrible beyond horrible because it is real. But if I might describe that, I might mess with a person's comfort level, which is not a good thing to do. And by doing the same description of something, there might be somebody who is like, oh boy, that's real scary. Oh, I'm shaking. So let them figure it out for themselves. If you read the Torg Session 0 PDF on setting things with Torg Eternity, go read that. It works with any game whatsoever. Talk about lines and veils. In Orrorsh, use those veils. You don't have to be explicit. You can hint. You can suggest and let the player's mind take it from there. So those are my how to work with fear, because I know fear in horror is difficult for a lot of people, and also the aspect of my rant, which is when you think of Torg as a heroic game, if that's how you want your Cosmverse to be, it's canon, so fine. But you're going to have to change Orrorsh, and you'll probably have to change, when we talked about Tharkold, you'll have to change Tharkold 2 to fit your Cosm. That's fine. But if you go and you grab the book and you just do it out of the book, and you're like, why is everybody dying? Why are, every fight my characters, my group gets into, it's TBK, oh, this realm is completely bad, it's destroying my heroic world. It's because this reality is not heroic. I'm sorry, it's not. It's cinematic. It's not heroic. Your monsters are going to come back unless you find that information. That is one thing I forgot. They have true deaths. You have to figure out the specific way to kill the monster and keep it permanently dead. Otherwise, it will come back. That's what the investigation and research type tropes do, which are a trope of the horror genre, the Gothic horror genre. Go along with that, and you'll have much less trouble. Don't go into it as Torg is a heroic game. You can be heroes, you can do heroic things, but that doesn't mean the game itself is heroic. The game itself is a setting where invaders come to Earth with their own realities. That's the core aspect. And then you have the core game mechanics. Each setting is its own reality. That reality takes over. It doesn't care about anybody else's reality. Storm Knights have that special ability that they can bring their own reality with them through the Everloft 2, that they can cause contradictions. But that doesn't mean that they're invincible. That doesn't mean that what they do in this realm will work equally in the other realm. Take those into account, keep those in mind, and have a fun time playing in Orrorsh, the Gothic horror realm. So, until next time, if you liked it, hit like. If you didn't like it, hit dislike. Subscribe if you want to get future content popping up. I think there might even be a little setting to make sure you get my content. Thank you to the over a dozen people that have subscribed. I really do appreciate it. It's fun. I like doing these. Hopefully we'll grow. Put your comments in there. If you completely disagree with me, write down why. I'm happy to have a civil discourse. I am willing to talk with other people's have varying opinions. What I don't like is when people think that their opinions when it's actually a subjective opinion is better than anybody else's, or they tell somebody, oh, why don't you change the rule, but they're unwilling to change the rule. They want the game to change the rule. So that, if you're going to write something like that, don't. But if you want to have an actual honest discussion, critique of the material, and not me as a person, I will not critique you as a person, but we can get in and come up with some discussions that might be enjoyable. So, I am Lehman Crafton, aka Zorvalachan Less Than Guru, and until next time, have a Happy New Year.